Done.
All right, thanks, Rachel. All right, people. I hope all of you are able to hear my voice clearly, and all of you are able to see my screen. Just type in a few yeses into the chat box so that I know everything is in order and we don't have an issue from my end. All right. Thanks a lot for confirming. All right. So, yeah, we have started off on the right note. And yes, in terms of belief systems, I think that your belief system is fundamental to you doing well on anything that you take up. And this code that you see here in front of you is it symbolizes what I think about having having a certain level of self belief in what you can do, right? Because there's nothing you stand to lose by believing that you can do it, and I think that's, as I said, fundamental to starting off on the right foot. So do not ask whether you can do well on GMAT Quant, because people who achieved something did so because they believed they could. And that's something that I want all of you to do as well, especially in a topic like quant or math, which is a subject that is very often feared, quite often it's a hated subject. Therefore, it's important to start off with the right kind of mindset when you're preparing for the quant section of the GMAT. So, in today's session, um, we'll start off by understanding about the two upcoming sessions on GMAT arithmetic and understand why it's important to know about the GMAT adaptive algorithm and why it has been included in one of our sessions. Um, at the outset, some of you may be confused as to why you should learn about the adaptive algorithm when you are preparing for the GMAT quant, but it's definitely important. So that's one thing we'll talk about today. I'll also tell you about the strategies that we will teach in one of the sessions, strategies on problem solving and data sufficiency. I'll also talk about how we will help you build a strong foundation for quant by focusing on number theory and arithmetic in the other session that we are going to take up next weekend. And yes, we will have some takeaways that you can maybe clipboard somewhere and have it in front of you for every time for a long time to see and learn. So first things first, let's understand what the GMAT quant section tests you on. I'm not sure how many of you know the nomenclature of the GMAT quant section. It's called the quantitative reasoning section. So it does not only test your knowledge of mathematics, it does test it. There's no doubt about it. It does test your knowledge of basic high school level mathematics, but that's not it. It's not all, right? You're required to bring in your analytical skills, your ability to build cases, your ability to logically infer certain things, make uh, the right conclusions from the data given to you. So all these skills are tested. Your estimation skills are tested. So it's just not about mathematics and mathematics alone. There's a reason why it's called the QR section, quantitative reasoning section. So it's as much about reasoning as it is about math. Um, Also, one reason why you will probably have to take up the quant section is that some topics on GMAT quant probably become precursors to some subjects you may pick up at B school. So, for example, statistics is one such topic. You study statistics for GMAT quant because of two reasons. One, of course, you get questions on statistics in the quant section, but some of the concepts that you study on on statistics also become some kind of a precursor to the advanced statistics you might end up studying in B school. One more topic that I can think of is maybe percentages. It's a given, it's an obvious that percentages, the use of percentages and ratios and numbers is inevitable to any manager. So that's one more topic. Another topic that I can think of is probability. There are a lot of B schools that have a full top subject of probability, and you have credits for that subject. So studying probability for GMAT Quant again serves as a precursor for you to do well on the probability when you actually take it up in B school. So don't look at the GMAT Quant section as just another hurdle to cross. It is probably more than that, right? And you also know that the GMAT Quant section is adaptive, which means the difficulty level changes, it adapts to your ability, and based on how many correct answers you have given till that stage or how many wrong answers you have given till that stage, the next question, the difficulty level of the next question will depend on what you have done till then, right? So that's how the GMAT Quant section is adaptive. In fact, the verbal section is adaptive as well. So that's what we'll discuss, in the first session. Partially, in the first half of the first session, we'll understand why it is important to understand the algorithm, how the algorithm works, and how we can utilize our knowledge of the algorithm to become a better problem solver in quant, right? And some of your takeaways will also be that you don't have to be a math wizard to do well in quant. You don't have to have a degree in mathematics to do well in GMAT Quant, because it's just not about math alone. As I said, it's about striking a good balance between math and reasoning. So if you were fairly good at mathematics in high school, it becomes easy for you to catch up with the kind of quant that is coming up. However, if you did not have a good relationship with math in school, look at the positives. You have an opportunity to start things off in a different way, and that's what you will learn in some of our sessions. We don't only depend on conventional techniques or methods to solve math problems, right? And that's good. If you do not have a very good relationship with math in school, you still have a chance to make it up this time when you're preparing for GMAT Quant. Another takeaway that you will have from the first session is that you will learn how to take calculated risks. You will learn when to take a call to mark an answer and move on, when to decide that, okay, this is not going anywhere. If I continue being stuck in this problem, it's going to hamper my overall score. So let me pick an answer and move ahead. You'll also learn techniques to probably eliminate options and maybe make your best educated guess, right? So these will be the takeaways from the first half of the first session on GMAT Quant. We will also be discussing problem solving strategies in the first session. These are strategies which we have developed over an extended period of time by having solved a lot of questions ourselves and understood that it is just not the traditional equation-based approach which helps all the time, right? In fact, the traditional equation-based approach can be counterproductive a lot of times, right? So in problem-solving strategies, we will not only teach strategies that will help you save time, save effort, but they can also improve your accuracy rate by reducing the typical mistakes that people make when they have a traditional approach. So we will not only teach you the strategies, we'll also provide you triggers. We'll teach you, okay, when do you apply a certain strategy, right? When do you apply a strategy like plugging in values? Or when do you eliminate, all right? Or how do you attempt must be, could be questions? So we'll also discuss these triggers, which will help you start applying these strategies right from day one. So immediately after the first class, you open the official guide of the GMAT and maybe pick up a few problem solving questions. With the triggers being given to you, you'll be in a better position to understand, all right, this is a problem in which I can probably plug in values, right? Or this is a problem where I can use the options to solve a question, right? So that will be covered under problem solving strategies. And therefore, once you understand how these strategies work, you will realize that there's absolutely no pride in answering a quant question the step by step way, like we used to do in school. I always say that there are two modes. There is the school mode and the GMAT mode. So learning strategies is all about getting into GMAT mode and getting out of school mode, where we believed, all right, the step-by-step approach was the only way of solving a math problem. You will also come to learn that using the options is a great way of solving problem-solving questions. You'll also realize that when you use some of these strategies, your errors will come down. You'll start getting more answers right, because these strategies have been designed in such a way that some of the common errors are eliminated automatically, right? You will not even come close to those errors. And last but not the least, when you learn these strategies, they'll give you a lot of confidence, because you'll have this innate sense of smartness, coming in you, and you'll be like, wow, I didn't know this question could be solved this way, right? You'll start believing in yourself more, right? And when you have this sense of confidence and this sense of feeling smart, you'll automatically start liking what you're doing. Because typically that's one problem that test takers face. They don't like to solve questions a lot of times on math. And they look at it from a very mechanical point of view and say, okay, I need to get a 48 or a 49 on quant, so let me do what is necessary and just get it done. But these strategies will actually change your perspective and probably, bring you to a situation where you start enjoying solving the questions, right? So that's what we'll do in the problem solving strategy section. So problem solving strategy, a question on this section will probably look like this, right? So yeah, I don't mind giving all of you maybe a minute's time. Go ahead, solve this, please. I'll hold on for a minute. And after a minute's time, we can probably discuss this. Yeah, please go ahead. I'll put myself on mute so that I don't distract you. All right, that's about a minute's time. And when you see a question of this type, typically what happens is you end up thinking, let me create equations here, let me create some variables, and try to solve the equations and try to find the value of the variables. Okay, let's see what the conventional traditional approach is. A retailer buys an iPod from a wholesaler for $400. So if you are the retailer, you bought this iPod from the wholesaler for $400. So the cost price here represents 400. You mark up the price to get a profit of 25%. So you know the percentage of profit here is 25%. And from your knowledge of profit and loss, you understand that the percentage of profit is always calculated on the cost price, right? So actual profit here would be 25% of 400, which comes out to be $100. So the cost price is 400, the profit is $100. Your knowledge of selling price and cost price will tell you that SP will be nothing but cost price plus the profit. So that's 400 plus 100, which means you want to sell the iPod at $500, right? So that's your selling price. What is the mark price if he sells at a discount of 20%? All right, you will probably write down percentage of discount equal to 20%. And we know the percentage of discount is always calculated on the mark price, which is what we are trying to find out. So you probably take it as X, right? And 20% of X would be 20X by 100. And we know the selling price is nothing but, so this is your discount. And the selling price is nothing but the mark price minus the discount. We know the selling price to be 500. The mark price is unknown to us, X minus 20X by 100. This gives us 500 equal to 80X by 100. And then, of course, we just cancel off. 2 4s are 8, 2 5s are 10. This gives us 4 1s are 4, 1s are 4, 125. So the value of X will be 125 into 5, that is 625. This is a conventional approach. And that is the reason why this is probably not the most efficient and the effective approach, because on the efficiency front, it's not too concise. It takes a lot of steps, takes a lot of time. On the effectiveness front, if you do end up making a mistake in any one of the steps, your final answer will take a hit, right? That is the reason why in this session, we end up teaching you a strategy which helps you solve this question faster and with better accuracy. We are trying to find the mark price here, right? So therefore, if you are trying to find the mark price, all the options given here also represent the mark price. So what we are saying essentially is, we are saying, okay, 500 could be the mark price, 550 could be the mark price, 600 could be the mark price. We're trying to find out which one is actually the mark price, right? We know our cost price is 400. We know there is a profit of 25%, so profit is $100. So we know for a fact that we have to sell the iPod at $500 after giving a discount of 20% on the mark price. So therefore, if you observe the options, this is typical of a GMAT quant question, right? On a GMAT quant problem solving question, if your options are clear numbers, right? There are no variables here. They will always be arranged either in ascending order or in descending order. That's a great thing that GMAT is doing for you guys, right? Because we can now start from the middle value. We can say, okay, the mark price is 600. So we apply 20% of 600. The discount should be 120. 600 minus 120 will give me a selling price of 480, which means I can't obtain a 25% profit. Therefore, 600 is not my answer. If 600 cannot be my answer, 550, 500 also cannot be my answer. It has to be more than 600. So just by checking for one value, we were able to eliminate 3 options. Now we check for, let us say, 625. 20% of 625 will be 125. 625 minus 125 will give us 500, and 500 is what we want, which means delta is the answer. So if you look at this approach has very few variables. It has a lot of numbers, and all of us will agree that we deal with numbers better, right? The probability of making mistakes when you have numbers is lesser because you're able to see the numbers, right? You're able to add, multiply, apply a percentage. And that kind of forms the fundamental principle of our strategies. We insist on using more numbers and not just variables, right? And these strategies will prove invaluable to you because more than half of the quant section, right, close to 16, 17 questions on the quant section are problem solving questions. That is where these strategies will end up helping you. And by the way, this is just one of the strategies that you learn in the first session. There are at least 3 or 4 more strategies that can really help you become a better problem solver. So after we cover problem solving strategies, we'll move on to data sufficiency strategies. Now, I don't know how many of you know, but it was the GMAT that pioneered this model of data sufficiency, right? It was probably the first exam to introduce data sufficiency questions and test a student's reasoning skills, right? So in the strategies on data sufficiency, we will help you with strategies which are developed to handle DS questions. And very often what happens with DS questions is there's only one strategy that most test takers follow, they plug in values, right? So in this segment on DS strategies, we'll help you with alternative strategies and not just plugging in values, which will really help you improve your accuracy on DS. Very often when people start off with their preparation for GMAT Quant, I have seen that their accuracy on GMAT on DS questions is very low. It's probably 30%, 40%. I've seen 30 to 50 is the normal range. So it means if you solve 10 DS questions, you probably will get about 3 to 5 right, and the remaining will be wrong. That's primarily because your strategy is not in place. You're just following one strategy of plugging in values or using the statements. Now, in this section on DS strategies, we'll show you how you can leverage the question, how you can leverage the question data, the question stem, what is the order in which you have to take the statements, how do you interpret the statements, and improve your accuracy. We'll also have a multi-tier approach. We'll teach you how to deal with the individual statements, the combination of statements. What is the strategy to deal with an individual statement? What is the strategy to deal with the combination of statements? What kind of values do you plug in, right? All these things will be covered under DS strategies. So what happens when you do this is that you'll realize that DS is not the same as problem solving. It's an entirely different beast. It has its own rules and regulations, and you need to respect those rules if you want to get better at DS, right? And therefore, your strategy should be tailored to that situation. You can't use the same strategies that you use in problem solving for DS. You'll also realize that DS is more about your reasoning and logical abilities. It is less about your math skills. Very often, people who do well on problem solving find DS difficult because they think DS is only about using mathematical concepts and formulas and numbers. It is not. It is about your inference skills, your ability to conclude based on your inferences, how you break down assumptions, how you yourself don't make assumptions. These are some of the things that have to be taken care of in DS. And this is what you will learn in this segment of DS strategies. You'll also learn that DS questions are a direct measure of your decision making and estimation skills. Because in DS, you don't have to find an exact answer. You mark an answer when when you come to that stage where all right, I'm going to get an answer here. So it tests your decision making skills and it helps you improve on those skills. Right? That's one more thing you'll realize as you complete the DS strategies segment in the first session. So how does a data sufficiency question look? I'll just give you a glimpse of a DS question, but on the GMAT, for a DS question, the 5 answer options will remain standard. These are the 5 answer options. Option A is statement 1 alone sufficient, statement 2 alone not sufficient. Option B is just the opposite of option A, statement 2 alone sufficient, statement 1 alone not sufficient. Option D is each statement alone is sufficient. Option C is both 1 and 2 together are sufficient, but neither of them alone is sufficient. And option E is clearly data insufficient, which means even after you combine the statements, the data is not sufficient. So during the DS strategy segment, we'll also teach you how to eliminate options right? And not just have these options in mind, right? We'll also help you understand how to work with the options. What is the flow? That is what I meant by having a multi-tier approach. So how does a DS question look? A DS question looks like this. It has a question statement, which might give you some data. So there is some information given here. We know X and Y are real numbers. We know 2X plus Y is 11. So this is question data. So you have some data here, you have some data here. You can use this data anywhere. This is common data, right? You can use this data along with this. You can use this data along with this, and when you combine them together as well. What is the value of Y? So again, we'll teach you that there are multiple types of DS questions. It could be a value kind of question. It could be a yes, no kind of question. So here we have 2x plus y equal to 11. That's given to us in the question. First statement alone, x equal to 2. So x equal to 2 means 4 plus y is 11. Can we find out a value of y here? We certainly can. You will also learn that in a DS question, it's important to get a unique answer. Any information that gives you a unique answer is sufficient information, and anything that doesn't give you a unique answer is insufficient information. So the first statement alone is sufficient to answer the question here. This is a small typo. This is x square equal to 4. So we have x square equal to 4. A common trap here is that many people will say x equal to 2, whereas x square equal to 4 means x equal to 2 or minus 2, which means you'll have two values for y. You'll have y equal to 7, which we already got, or you'll have y equal to 15. So the data given in the second statement alone is not giving us a unique value. It's giving us two values. So the second statement alone is insufficient. And according to the options, the answer here is A for alpha. So we'll help you solve a DS question from scratch, starting off with very simple questions and then gradually building up the tempo, because we realize that DS is almost as important as PS, right? Although the number of questions are relatively fewer, you still have 14 to 15. This is almost one half. And in fact, this is the difficult half. So after you complete the DS strategies section of the class, you will have a fair idea of how to deal with PS questions differently and how to deal with DS questions differently. So that's what we'll cover in the first class. In the second class, okay, Anubhav, just hold on to that question. I'll come back to your question at a later stage, right? In the second class, which is the arithmetic basics class, we will understand the importance of the topics in arithmetic, and you'll get a very good idea of why number theory is important for you to do well in arithmetic. We'll also discuss the basics of ratios and percentages. And when we do this, you'll understand again that these are nothing but applications of number theory, right? And you'll also understand that if you want to do well in the other two sections, algebra and geometry, it's very important for you to do well in arithmetic, because arithmetic kind of provides an entry point into algebra and geometry. It's a segue. So when you complete the first session on arithmetic, which is arithmetic basics, you will not only understand the different kinds of questions on numbers, but you'll also understand that arithmetic probably forms the most significant module in the quant section. And you'll realize that doing well in numbers is probably the single most important thing for you to do well in GMAT quant, right? Broadly, in the basics class, we'll cover some of these topics. We'll cover the classification of numbers. We'll have some discussion on odds and evens, very basic concepts of arithmetic. As we go on, as we hit the advanced sessions, we'll cover the advanced concepts like prime numbers, composite numbers, divisibility concepts and remainders, which is typically a very common problem area for a lot of test takers. the percentage concepts like successive percentage change, rates, time and distance, time and work will be covered under the advanced sessions on arithmetic. Of course, you'll again have a webinar on that. We'll tell you in more detail what we'll cover under the advanced concepts. So with that, guys, I think it's probably time for us to see what a few examples and understand what kind of questions you can expect on the arithmetic classes. So Charlotte, the objective of this session is to not only give you an introduction into what you can expect from the sessions starting next weekend, but also to expose you to the GMAT quant section in general and what you should do to as a prerequisite to come well prepared for the sessions next weekend. Does that answer your question? So by the time we answer a few questions here, you'll probably have a better idea of what to expect from the sessions next weekend. Yeah? All right. Okay, so this is a question that I want all of you guys to answer, right? I'll give you 2 minutes so that you can take your time, you can decide on your approach, solve this, and give me an answer in about 2 minutes. Yeah? All right, I'll just put myself on mute. All right, folks. So yeah, that's a couple of minutes. You can mark your answers now. Most of you have already marked your answers. Let me. All right, there are just about 3 of you who have not marked your answers. Make up your mind, guys. That's the point I was making. You need to take a decision, mark an answer. Sometimes you'll have to guess. That's something you need to learn when preparing for GMAT Quant as well. All right, that's time. Okay, so 75% of you, although the number is small, 75% is still a big majority. Okay, feel that it is B for Bravo. One technique that a lot of test takers use here is they'll say, okay, 7th term is 9. I know they are consecutive odd integers. So I'll just say 8th term is 11 and I'll count backwards, right? It's a very mechanical approach, a very rudimentary approach, and it'll take you time. If you don't do the calculations correctly, you might actually end up getting the wrong answer, right? But there's no harm in writing down maybe the last three values, you know the seventh term is 9. Therefore, the eighth term will be 11 because we are dealing with consecutive odd integers. The sixth term will be 7. This will actually help you eliminate one answer option, right? Because you're trying to find the sum of the terms. So 11 plus 9 is 20, 20 plus 7 is 27. So we can just eliminate option 22. Option A here is not my answer. I mean, you could go on till the first term, but not a very smart approach. Now, since I know that these are consecutive odd integers, I know the seventh term is 9. Remember, 2n plus 1 is the general form of an odd number, right? 2n plus 3 will be the next number, 2n plus 5 will be the next number, and 2n plus 7 will be the next number, right? Now, if I call this as the seventh term, this will become the fifth term. The fourth term will be 2n minus 1 because you have to subtract 2, 2n minus 3, 2n minus 5, and 2n minus 7. Remember, these are consecutive odd integers, so they have a constant difference of 2, which means you are looking at an arithmetic progression. When you have 8 unknown terms in an arithmetic progression, this is how you assume the terms, right? What are we trying to find out? We are trying to find the sum of the terms. Now, if we add up all of the terms, minus 7 will get cancelled with plus 7, minus 5 will get cancelled with plus 5, minus 3 will get cancelled with plus 3. This will get cancelled. So the sum of the terms will be 8 times of 2n, which will be 16n. And we are trying to find out 16n here. We also know that the seventh term, 2n plus 5, is a 9. So we can find out 2n here. 2n will be a 4. N will be a 2. Therefore, the sum of the terms will be a 32. Right? So this is how you would solve this question. It's a combination of assuming the right kind of variables in a smart way and then utilizing the data given instead of just doing things mechanically. All right. So as you saw here, writing down the last three terms helped us eliminate. So you should always eliminate certain options. But after you eliminate certain options, you should also follow a smart technique in solving for the right answer. Right? So if you followed this approach, it would probably take you about a minute or a minute and a half to get to the answer of 32. All right. Any questions on this problem? Any of you do not understand the technique or the strategies? Please feel free to let me know in the chat box. All right, so I take that as a no. Okay, let's move on to example 2 and probably take a shot at a DS question. That's right, Anubhav. That's the point I made, right? So the assumption that we can't make in the first question is you can't assume that they are positive odd integers, right? Okay, 2 minutes, guys. Okay, so most of you say A for alpha, and it's 2 minutes, and I think I should end the poll now. Yeah. So I think a lot of you have fallen for the common trap, and yeah, that's probably what I wanted to highlight, and that's what our DS course will always keep doing. It will keep highlighting the traps that you should not get into whenever you solve a DS question. Is x cube y power 4 z power 5 more than 0? So you're asking yourself, is x cube y power 4 z power 5 positive? All right, so here's where I probably take up a critical reasoning concept and help you understand better, because as I've been telling, data sufficiency questions test your knowledge of reasoning, right? Now, there is this concept of exact opposite and logical opposites, right? So if I say white, what is the exact opposite of white, please? Anyone can type your answers in the chat box. Yeah, what is the exact opposite of white? Black. Okay. All right. If I say white, what is the logical opposite of white? Not white. That's correct, right? Correct. Brilliant. So, data sufficiency questions test your knowledge of logical opposites and not exact opposites. So, what's the question here? The question here is x power 3, y power 4, z power 5 more than 0? So, this is a yes no kind of a DS question where you're supposed to give a yes or a no as an answer. So if you say yes, you're telling x cube y power 4 z power 5 is more than 0. But what does a no mean? What would a no mean? A lot of you would say a no means x cube y power 4 z power 5 is less than 0. This is what a lot of you would say, but a lot of you would miss out the fact that x cube y power 4 z power 5 can be equal to 0. And that's what causes trouble, right? You tend to think of these two cases, but you leave out this case. Look at the first statement. Xz is more than 0. So you said xz is more than 0, which means both of them are positive or both of them are negative. Therefore, you said x cube will be positive, z power 5 will be positive, and I know y power 4 is always positive. That's what you told yourself, which is a white lie. Y power 4 is a non-negative value, which means y power 4 can be equal to 0. The first statement alone is insufficient because it does not tell us whether y is 0 or not. If y becomes equal to 0, then you have this case. But if y is not equal to 0, then you have this case. So from the first statement alone, you have a no, you have a yes, because you don't know why. The second statement alone is clearly insufficient because it does not give us the value of x. It only tells us about y and z. But an important thing that the second statement tells us is that it tells us that y is not equal to 0. Right? Because if y were to be equal to 0, then this information would not exist. So the inferred idea from the second statement is that y is not equal to 0, and you go ahead and use this inferred idea when you combine the statements. So when you combine the statements, you know x and z are giving you more than 0. So you know this is positive. So this will also be positive. What about y now? Y will be negative. If x is negative, z is also negative. What will be y now? Y will be positive. Whatever be the case, x cube y power 4 z power 5 will always be more than 0 because the equal to 0 has been eliminated. Therefore, the answer here is C for Charlie. We need to combine both the statements to answer this question with a definite yes. So this is a very common trap that GMAT sets up in inequalities questions, in questions on numbers. And this is a very common trap that people get into because they ignore 0, because they don't know logical opposites, right? They end up believing less than is the opposite of greater than, right? So this is just an example of one of the traps that we will keep highlighting in some of our DS sessions, so that by the end of completing the entire quant module, you have a very good grasp of the traps that you should not get into, right? And as you saw here, you also saw that I demonstrated how to solve a DS question. First, try to break down the question. Next, use the individual statements and combine the statements only when you figure out that the statements are insufficient, right? That is how we will teach you how to solve a DS question in all our sessions. Any questions here? So this was probably a hard one for a lot of you, hard one to swallow because a lot of you got the answer wrong. That's the idea. It's not about the answer being right or wrong. It's about what you learn from it. Right? Any questions? All right. Okay. So how would you solve this question, for example? At the outset, it looks just a simple, straightforward question on odds and evens. So I'll probably give you lesser time this time. I'll probably give you 90 seconds and maybe challenge you all a little bit. All right, people, that's time. Okay, looks like this was a tough one for some of you, because just about half of you have polled your answers. Okay, end of poll now. There we go. So 60% of you who have polled an answer say B for Bravo. All right. So A and B are integers. We know A and B are whole values. They can't be fractions. That's the point. They are integers. So don't think that they are positive integers. That's a very common assumption that many test takers make. They are just integers. AB plus A is odd. Which of the following must be even? So when you look at AB plus A is odd, your natural reaction would be to, plug in values by using the odd and even rules on addition, right? So odds and evens rules on addition say odd plus even equal to odd, right? Odd plus odd equal to even, and even plus even equal to even, right? So the moment you say, okay, there are two numbers being added to give you a odd result, I'd not be surprised if more than half of you said, okay, I'll use the first equation. But the problem in doing that is you'll have to plug in a lot of values. There are many, many, many cases that you have to take into consideration. This is where these are questions which we use to teach you how to factor out certain variables. So you know A is common, so you can write it as A into B plus 1 equal to odd. What happens when you factor out certain terms is you are converting an addition to a multiplication. And dealing with a product is much easier because you know that the result of multiplying two odd numbers will give you an odd number. And this is the only case that satisfies this condition. So when you factor out A, you understand that this has to be odd, A has to be odd, and the entire B plus 1 has to be odd so that the final result is odd. When you do this, you understand that B plus 1 is odd. Now you can use the addition and the subtraction principle. Now we can say B is equal to odd minus 1. And we know 1 is an odd number. So therefore, this will become odd minus odd. And we know odd minus odd is definitely an even number. So when we break down the information given, we understand that B has to be an even number. Whereas it is not necessary that the other numbers have to be even numbers, right? So that's what you have to do in this question, not plug in values for A, B, and A. You need to factor out variables and convert it to a multiplication from an addition. This is a strategy. This is a strategy that can help you in problem solving in data sufficiency. This is a very common strategy on a lot of our questions, right? Yeah, the answer is B. I hope there are no doubts on this question. So let's move on to the next question. Question number 4. And I'm pretty sure that most of you will be able to attempt this question and get to an answer because there's nothing complicated about this. 1 minute 30 seconds again because it's an easy one according to me. All right, people, that's 2 minutes. Yes, Rachel, I've run the poll. I think people are answering. Okay, that's time, and it's almost 8:30. So I think I'll end the poll here and we'll discuss this question. So there are a couple of things that we teach you in this question. One of them is to build smart techniques to convert one type of a number to another type of a number, right? So a 0.3333 can be converted to a fraction. This is a 1 by 3. A 1.6666, so 1.6666 can be broken up as 1 plus 0.6666, which is nothing but 1 plus 2 by 3, which is nothing but 3 ones are 3 plus 2, 5 by 3. So that is a 5 by 3. A 0.125 would be a 1 by 8. So this is something that we teach in the percentages session, how to convert a percentage to a fraction. This is basically a percentage or a recurring decimal to a fraction. In the basics class on arithmetic, we teach you how to divide fractions, right? So we say if a by b is divided by another fraction c by d, you can write it as a by b multiplied by d by c. This is a technique that can stump a lot of test takers initially when they're starting off with their preparation. So therefore, if the division is there, you can just multiply by the reciprocals. So 0.375 would be 3 by 8. So you multiply by the reciprocal, it will be 8 by 3. 0.8 would be a 4 by 5. So you multiply by the reciprocal, it will be 5 by 4. And 0.8333 would be a 5 by 6. So multiply by the reciprocal, it will be 6 by 5. Right? And then we go about cancelling stuff. At this stage, I'm pretty sure that most of you said, all right, D will not be my answer, E will not be my answer, because I will definitely get a fraction. Let's cancel off stuff. 5 5s are 3 1s are 3, 3 2s are 6, 2 1s are 2, 2 2s are 4. You can cancel off the 8s. So this expression will come out to be 5 upon 9 2s are 18. Right? Now, when you simplify this, 5 by 18, you know it is not closest to half. So this is where we are testing your estimation skills. Are you able to estimate? So 5 by 18 would be approximately 1 by 3.6. And you know 3.6 is closer to 4 compared to 3. So the correct answer here is C for Charlie. And B for Bravo gets eliminated. So you don't have to find 5 by 18 here, right? Many times I have seen a lot of test takers doing 18 by 5 by 18 and saying, okay, this is 0.2 something, and then marking 1 by 4. That's not required because you can estimate it to be 1 by 3.6 and clearly that is closer to 1 by 4. So estimation is also a technique that we teach very often in our questions on arithmetic, especially percentages, fractions, decimals. We teach you how to estimate. So as the last question for the day, I've put a slightly hard question, a challenger, just to show you that even on questions like this, you don't have to know a lot of math to be able to solve this question. I'll give you 2 minutes on this, considering this is the last question. Go ahead, solve this. Okay, folks, that's time. Okay, that's interesting. I have not got an answer, and that's exactly what I was mentioning about decision making. Even after 2.5 minutes, most of you have not been able to make a decision and mark an answer. I have to unfortunately end the poll. Probably none of you got it right, or some of you are probably close to marking an answer. That's the point. You need to be able to make up your mind. A positive integer n is a perfect number, and we're not talking of perfect squares here. We are talking of a perfect number. What's a perfect number is what some of you are asking at this stage, right? Some of you may have studied about this in school but may have forgotten. And GMAT makes your life simple because it defines it for you. A perfect number is a number in such a way that the sum of all the positive factors of n, including 1 and the number itself, is equal to double the number. So for example, 6 is a perfect number. What are the factors of 6? Factors of 6 are 1, 2, 3, and 6. Right? So these are the factors of 6. These are the numbers using which you can divide 6 completely. Now, what are the sum of the factors? What happens if I add up all the factors? 6 plus 3, 9, 9 plus 2, 11, 11 plus 1, 12. Right? So when you have sum of the factors as double the number, right, that number is called a perfect number. That's what a perfect number is. Okay. So the question is, what is the sum of the reciprocals of all the positive factors of the perfect number 28? All right. If you wanted to do it manually, you could do it, right? There are the factors are 1, then you have a 2, then you have a 4, then you have a 7, then you have a 14, then you have a 28. Right? These are the factors of 28. There are not too many factors, there are about 6 of them. But we are trying to find the sum of the reciprocals. So we are trying to find the sum of 1 by 1 plus 1 by 2, so on till 1 by 28. Now, clearly at this stage, some of you are like, okay, I think I'll get a fraction, so I'll go ahead and mark A or B. That's not correct. Because when you observe this sequence, observe the numbers below. How do you solve such expressions? You'll obviously take the LCM. When you take the LCM will clearly be 28 because all the other numbers are factors of 28, which means 28 is a multiple of all these numbers. So LCM will be 28. If you take the LCM as 28, this number will be 28. Next one will be 14. The next one will be 7 and so on till 1. What are these? These are nothing but factors of 28. And the question tells me that the sum of the factors is equal to double of the number, 56. So 56 by 28 will give me 2. So I didn't have to actually add all the reciprocals. I just had to realize that the LCM is 28 and then I went ahead and used the property given to figure out that this sum will be double and then I had my answer. So that's one more thing that you'll learn in some of our quant sessions. You'll learn how to leverage the data given, right? And not to do things manually all the time. So I hope these examples have given you guys an idea of what kind of strategies that we use in our sessions. Time to summarize what we discussed. So if you really want to do well in the GMAT quant section, you have to focus on improving your math skills and also developing some of the reasoning skills that I discussed. And yes, you need to use smart strategies along with conventional techniques. I'm not saying conventional techniques should be given a gate pass, but you need to combine smart strategies with some traditional techniques that you learned in school so that you have a balanced approach. It can help you save time, your effort, and reduce your stress levels. When it comes to a topic like numbers and arithmetic, you probably need to focus on small improvements, probably learn about the perfect squares, perfect cubes, how they behave, learn about fractions and decimals, then move on to odds and evens. And that's how the course is structured. That's what we do in the basics class. And then we slowly move on to advanced topics in the upcoming classes. And of course, we also teach you how important it is to be good with estimation skills and approximation skills. Right? That's important for you to do well if you want to save time. So that's all I had from my end. Um, I see a question probably popping up. Vartika, I'll just hold on to your question. I'll get back to you in the Q&A segment, right? I will hand over the control now to Rachel,
Yeah.
who will lead the session from here. Rachel, just give me a moment.
No, you can just move to the next slide. I think that's
okay. All right. I can do that, right? Okay, great. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Aravind. I think that was a very insightful session. And yeah, Vartika, we'll take your question in the Q&A session. We'll get to it in like 2 minutes. So before that, a little bit about Crackable. So as you know, we are a GMAT Prep and MBA application services company. And in terms of GMAT Prep, we provide an in-depth delivery of foundational concepts in all our, let's say, courses, like just like the session that you saw just now. Our faculty members ensure that they delve deep and make our students understand every concept very well. And it's a result oriented teaching pedagogy that we follow here. And at every level there is a test performance that you will be able to take so that you know where you stand. And we have the always on support team who will help you out in case you need any help with your preparation, while you're taking up our course, right? Arvind, can we move to the next slide? Yeah. So we don't really believe in one size fits all policy. So just because of that reason, we have like 4 different courses. Like one is GMAT on demand course, which is something that you can pace. You can pace it yourself. You don't have to attend live sessions. You can watch the pre-recorded videos and then prepare for the GMAT yourself. Then we have the GMAT live at home course, wherein our faculty members conduct sessions live online, and you can, it's a very interactive session, just like how it is, when you attend classroom sessions, right? You can ask doubts, and Arvind also teaches, he also takes live at home quant sessions. So that's one of the other courses that we have. Then we have the GMAT Score Up, which is like the advanced course, wherein if you feel that you are at a, let's say, 600 650 level, but you want to improve your score beyond 700 or something like that, you can take up the advanced course. And if you are somebody who feels that you need personal tutoring sessions, which is like GMAT one-on-one, like with a faculty member, so that you get to, you get one-on-one personal sessions with them, you can opt for our personal tutoring sessions as well. Then as you can see on the right hand side, we have the MBA applications, interview prep, and the burger plan as well, wherein we help you with your applications, interview prep, and improve your resume when it comes to applying to your desired B schools, right? Yeah. This is what you get once you pick our courses, like the access to the platform, wherein you have 80+ hours of on-demand videos. Then you can test your concepts. You have you get access to sectional tests. You have, when it comes to the live at home sessions, it'll be 10 weekend live sessions that you get to attend, and wherein they'll deep dive into concepts. And you have OG guide video solutions as well. But the highlight is that our faculty members will ensure that your queries are resolved immediately. And we also have support facilitators who are available all the time and who will help you out if you have any doubts or anything of that sort. We'll also help you out with resources and guides so that you utilize the right kind of GMAT prep resources, right? Yeah. So if you wish to, we have a lot of students that we've coached over, many years. So if you wish to see or read their success stories, you can go to the link that I'm posting in the chat box. to see how they've benefited from the course and their GMAT journey itself, and that'll definitely help you avoid a lot of mistakes that they made when they were preparing for the GMAT and applying to top universities like Stanford, Wharton, NCR, ISB, or as you can see like Tepper or Rotman as well. So I posted the link in the chat window. You can click on that link and read up on the stories of our success stories of our students actually. Yeah. So this is the basic arithmetic session that you just attended. The next class that you can probably look at attending is something in which Arvind will be just, helping you strengthen the basic concepts, and you'll be learning a lot more about numbers. You'll be practicing even more questions, and Arvind will also be helping you, understand each and every question in detail, like how he did today. And you will get to practice a lot more questions in that session. So if you're somebody who's interested in signing up for it and joining the class, you can definitely leave a message or give a call to the number that's provided in the chat window. One of our team members will definitely reach out or reply to you, and so that you get access to that as well. Or if you are somebody who wish to try out our Kickstarter course, let's say you want to just try out and see how it's going to work. Arvind, can we move to the next slide? You can click the link in the chat box and you can try out our Kickstarter course, wherein you get access to key GMAT course videos. You get free downloadable checklists. You get a sneak peek into the official guide solutions that we provide, and you also get templates and cheat sheets to crack the GMAT in this Kickstarter course. It's more like giving you a taste of how our course is completely structured, right? Anubhav, I will make a note of this, and if you can leave a message in this given number, one of our team members will definitely help you access it. I hope that's fine. Yeah. I think we can move on to the Q&A session. So if anybody has any questions, I think there was one question in the chat window, Arvind, if you can take that up, and the rest of you can ask questions if you have.
Sure, Rachel. So Vartika, the answer to your question is yes. Any number that has the sum of its positive factors equaling double the number is a perfect number. And therefore, a perfect number will always be an even number. All right? The answer to your question is a yes. If there are any other questions, you can post them in the chat box or the Q&A box, and I'll be happy to answer them. Yes, people. So I think there was one more question by Anubhav, if I'm right. Which was on the data sufficiency question. Though in this question, B is not sufficient. Suppose it had been, if we get a value of Y that is different from 7. On GMAT questions, that will never happen. Anubhav, that you'll get two different answers from the individual statements. That is the characteristic of a GMAT quant question, that you will always get the same answers from both the individual statements. So I hope that answers your question. However, if you do end up getting different answers, as long as a statement is giving you one single value, that statement is sufficient. Yeah, any other questions, people? That's right, Anubhav. So there's absolutely no difference between a value kind of DS and a yes no kind of DS in terms of rules. The rules are the same. It's just in terms of answers that the questions differ. All right, next question, please. please feel free to ask any questions that you may have on your mind. There's no restriction on the type of questions that need to be posted. Uh, as long as you want to clarify something, that's what we want to address. All right. So in that case, I think Rachel, I think there are no other questions, I believe. So I think we can.
No, there's nothing else. Yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. So yeah, Rachel, would you like to take over?
Yeah. So if you have any doubts regarding the upcoming sessions, or if you would like to know anything more, or if you have any queries, you can write to hello@crackverbal.com. We will have one of our team members reply to you, or you can WhatsApp to the number that I have provided in the chat window, the same that you can see on the screen right now. And if you want to receive, if you want to see updates on GMAT or MBA applications, you can follow us on our social media platforms, which is LinkedIn, Facebook, and you must have definitely seen our videos on YouTube. So if you follow, and we have a Telegram community as well. So if you can follow us, you will constantly get updates regarding the GMAT exams and let's say the MBA applications as well. So I think that's it from our end for today. Thanks a lot, Aravind.